Well, we're in southeast Kansas, and in particular at the Parsons facility here at Kansas State University Research Center in southeast Kansas. And we're talking a lot about fescue and Bermudagrass, maybe the two most common species that we have to graze cattle on. If you would, tell me just a little bit of the positives and maybe the downfalls of those two species.
So coming not from southeast Kansas, being a transplant, a lot of times, fescue is identified as a weed. It has a bunch of negatives associated with it. But as you mentioned, there are a lot of really good positives to it. It's a high biomass production forage that is it is the most commonly planted in the United States. It covers millions of acres. But one of the other great things about it, it is drought tolerant, insect tolerant, and pretty much you just can't get rid of it.
When do we apply fertilizers if we need to, and maybe what are some of the other offsets to that, maybe including legumes into it? What would be your recommendation in regards to those?
So on your fertility requirements, of course, the first thing you need to do is get a soil test. Know what you've got out there, because surprisingly enough, we do produce lime here in southeast Kansas, but we do have a lot of very acidic soils. So please go ahead and get a soil test. That'd be number one. One of my cohorts would be very proud of me by definitely saying, that's the most important step in your fertility design, is doing that. And if you get your pH appropriate, you're going to be much more efficient at use of that nitrogen and that phosphorus. So really get a soil test first. And then, our big ones, NPK. Those are our main ones that we're looking at. So if you are grazing fescue year-round, what has been more commonly found to provide the highest quality grass is to do in your spring just 40 pounds to maybe 50 pounds of nitrogen. And then in your fall fertilization, that's when you put in your phosphorus and potassium according to soil test, plus 60 units of nitrogen. Now you might be sitting there going, wait a minute, you get more growth in the spring than you do in the fall. Why are you putting more nitrogen in the fall versus in the spring? Well, it's back to we don't want that fescue to get so far ahead of us to grow so fast. The more nitrogen you give it in the spring, the faster it'll go to maturity, putting out that seed head. And so that's kind of been the magic balance from the nitrogen perspective we have seen for year-round grazing. Now you change that if you're wanting to put it up for hay, or if you're only grazing it for a spring forage, then you load it up front, more nitrogen. If you're stockpiling, you can even up that 60 a little bit more, but that's kind of been where I've found to be a very good economic perspective. Now for your Bermudagrass, split application of a total of 100 pounds of nitrogen is kind of what will result in enough biomass to support cows and stockers. But when I say split application, I like to put one out in end of April, 1st of March, or 1st of May, and then again in July. And then that really kind of keeps your Bermuda high quality throughout the whole summer.
Okay.
And another thing to think about is natural fertility input, not with fertilizers, but with plants. There's a certain class of grazable plants out there called legumes that fix atmospheric nitrogen and convert that into a form of nitrogen that's usable by plants. The common additions to tall fescue sod, for example, would be red clover, white clover, and other things of that nature. Jamie Lynn probably has a much longer list of those plants than I do. But you can replace all or definitely part of the synthetic fertilizer input with nitrogen that's being put back into the soil with plants grown in co-culture.
And some of the data shows you could replace anywhere between 35 to 60%, maybe even 100, depending on how much clovers you have. Now, there's a few things, he said about a greater list. The red clover is one of the most commonly planted in fescue, and that's because it has a isoflavin, I said that wrong. It has a compound in it that acts as a little bit of a binder for some of those ergot alkaloids. And so some of the feed companies have been extracting that compound to be able to modify or be able to substitute or get rid of a little bit of the fescue toxicosis. So that's really kind of the main reason a lot of guys put in the red clover. Your white clover is a little more productive in southeast Kansas. That stuff will show up forever if you let it. But we also like to use bird's foot trefoil, and it's a non-bloating legume. So if you're worried about bloat, and if you have a stand over 30% legumes out there, especially on fescue, get a bloat block out there or some other management for bloat, because you have a very high potential to cause some issues from a digestive perspective. So if you're worried about that, bird's foot trefoil offers that opportunity. And I'm standing next to the Sericea lespedeza killing expert, or the man who dislikes it as much. You almost are afraid to say it. But Korean lespedeza is a wonderful legume that grows very well here in southeast Kansas. It does take a little more management to stay in that good quality grazing perspective, but if you're ever looking to incorporate it into a haying enterprise, that's one of my favorites to put into a hay.
Okay, you said a couple of different things that I want to go back to before I forget. But one of those, I mean, we would think about these legumes to offset some cost associated to fertility that we think is necessary to make these plants persist. Although there's got to be some co-benefits to having legumes inside of those monocultures as well. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Oh, I can take that one. I mentioned before that monocultures can be risky from the standpoint that there's always a silver bullet for every plant species out there in nature that can take away your production for the year. You know, when things are grown in co-culture with another species or with a handful of other species, the forage stand becomes that much more resilient because it's less likely that all the silver bullets for all the species are going to coalesce at one time. So for example, you get armyworms and you lose your novel endophyte tall fescue or your endophyte free tall fescue. If you have red clover or some other legume interspersed with that fescue resource, you're still going to have some kind of a forage base. Diversity is a risk management strategy from that perspective.
When you add in clovers, a lot of the research shows that you can improve stalker gains on your toxic fescue 1/10 to nearly 2/10 of a pound a day. So that is a direct gain advantage we can see with getting rid of that monoculture.
And probably pays for the cost of the seed.
Yes, it does.
Very quickly. Very good. So one other comment that was made, and that was in regard to haying. So even though we've talked a lot in the past about minimizing the number of days that we would ever have to haul foodstuffs in to meet that animal demand by the day, that being primarily hay. So what do you think about hay products from these types of forages? Fescue, Bermuda, maybe even the incorporation of legumes into those if you're going to put them up for hay.
Anytime you can add those legumes in there, every hay test I've had, you're going to boost that crude protein even more, as well as reduce our negative fiber components. So it's always been a benefit to it. Now, the best thing though, and we are notorious because the ideal time to be putting up hay on fescue is right when it's raining all the time here in southeast Kansas. So we let it get a little too mature. And so, not saying it's a worthless hay, but as with any type of haying, if you can get to it on time, that is the best thing to do. They dry very well, and those legumes mixed in there are really beneficial. And when you go to feed it out, always get your hay test. That way, don't guess, especially with the price of other commodities today.